Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Figured Out cast for March 2021. It is hard to believe it is already March. I'm Adam Koralik, your host, and as always, well, not always, this is not guaranteed, but we do have Rob back. Welcome back, Rob.
Good to be back, as always. How you doing, Adam?
I'm okay. Just for those who don't know, Rob is not a guarantee on this show. He is actually a Patreon-backed option, not by himself, but by you guys. It's a group goal. As long as the Patreon stays above, I think it's $400 a month, then Rob is the DLC that sticks around. So Rob basically has other people to thank for him being able to come and annoy everyone. So, Rob, why don't you do that?
Thank who?
Everyone.
Everyone? Thank you, everyone.
There you go. All the Patreon backers. Seriously, thank you. The link is in the description if anybody wants to join. You can just support the channel with a minimal donation. You can get early access to videos if you want to do that. You can pick subjects. You can get shout-outs. You can even be on the podcast, as is the case, not for Rob, but for other people. Later, Abdullah will be joining us, our buddy from the UAE. But today we were actually supposed to have another guy on, a brand new newcomer named Keith. And he's actually, I got to give him props, man. He committed to 1 year of being a guest on the podcast. A year. Like he pre-did it in advance. So largely because of him, Rob, you even have a shot of staying on here. So you're welcome.
Good.
However,
now I can cancel my own Patreon.
You would eventually knock yourself off of the show by doing that. Like, the thing is, the Patreon is always teetering, like, right there. Like, every month I'm always looking at, like, I don't know, man. I don't know if Rob's going to make it. And you've lucked out a few times here. But so, again, if you guys could support and keep Rob on and, of course, help out the channel, that's always appreciated. But to Keith, though, he was supposed to join us, and having talked to him for a bit, he's pretty interesting about, like, he didn't want to just do the normal I pick subjects. Like, he has, like, ideas about things that he wants to do. And we were going to do one, but we got some bad news, like, right before we started recording. Like, within, like a half hour before we started recording?
Yeah, literally.
What exactly happened?
I got a message from Keith's fiance saying that he cannot join us this month because he's in the hospital. I don't know any details, but wishing Keith the best and hope he gets better. And we look forward to meeting him properly next month.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so, dude, I hope you're all right, and hopefully you join us soon, and just stay awesome. But we're gonna move forward without him for now, and we'll hold on. He already came up with like a whole gimmick and everything he wanted to do. Like, it's waiting in the wings for when he returns. But in the meantime, we will go with our more traditional method here of our subjects. Now, the first subject we have today was chosen by one of our backers, Caleb Sea-Dog. He is the supreme overlord of my Discord. Like, he has more power in there than I do, which, by the way, you can join the Discord for free at any time. Link in the description. But you can also link it up to your Patreon account so that you stand out in the crowd over there. But his subject that he wanted to talk about is very relevant to a video I just dropped about, I did a video not too long ago about the Nintendo Switch and what generation it falls into when it comes to video games. And I know you and I are super into the whole idea of generations and where consoles lay and all that. And his question was specifically, where are handhelds when we do that console discussion? Like when we talk about generations, why do handhelds never come up? Where do they fit? What's their place in history? But before I just continue to dominate, why don't you take it off here, Rob?
So I kind of asked myself that same question. I teach, for those who don't know, I teach classes on video game history. I have a degree in the subject, and I actually organize my class via console generations in order to kind of divide up, as opposed to doing decades or eras or something obtuse. I would use console generations because there are nice lines of demarcation in the progress of video game history. So I kind of had to reckon with that too. Now, there are console generations for handhelds. They kind of use the same years, tying them to the home consoles at the same time. So it's not an exact science, but so a second generation of video game consoles started in 1976 with the Fairchild Channel F and lasted until 1983 with the introduction of the Famicom and this SG-1000. So if you got something like the Microvision or those little football handhelds or something like that, though it released during that time, they would be considered second generation. But when I ended up doing it, I eschewed that kind of style of notation just because there are so much fewer handhelds than home consoles that I just found it a bit difficult to just have that sparse nature in terms of the handhelds. So what I ended up just doing is every decade or every 5 years, I would focus. So I would do handhelds of the late 70s, and early 80s, and then like the late 80s and early 90s, late 90s, 2000s, 2010s, things like that. That's how I ended up organizing it in my lectures, just because I felt it flowed a little bit better. And we always discussed handhelds after discussing the full range of console generations for home consoles. So it's kind of a weird thing. I'm curious, Adam, because one of my most requested videos of yours, and a lot of people's requested videos, is like to do an equivalent handheld recap series like you've done for the home consoles that you have. And I'm curious how you would organize that as well.
Oh, my answer is nowhere near as complicated as yours. Basically, it's handhelds are not home consoles. They're their own thing. So the rules do not apply to them. You can't say, oh, the DS is part of this generation of consoles, because it's not even a console. It's like saying that my car is this generation of aircraft. They're different things. There's no reason, apples and oranges, man. There's no reason to compare them. So there are generation rules specifically for the portable lines. And there you can say this is a first-gen portable, this is a second-gen portable, this is whatever. And to be honest, I'm a little bit foggier on exactly where those borders are drawn. And the same concept of rules apply, but they simply don't cross over. You know what I mean? Like, again, you would talk about one generation of a Volkswagen versus another generation of Volkswagen, but you're still talking about a car, versus one generation of a Gulfstream aircraft versus another generation of a Gulfstream aircraft. You're talking about generations. Those rules apply, but you don't compare the Volkswagen to the Gulfstream. And that's basically how it is with video game consoles versus video game portables. They're just different animals entirely.
Yeah. There are kind of lines of demarcation, like for, I think, the Game Boy, the Lynx, Game Gear, all those late 80s, early 90s handhelds. I believe those are considered fourth generation handhelds, something like the Microvision or the Adventure Vision. Some of the early Game & Watches would be considered like second gen, I believe. But it's a little bit, it's kind of weirder just because, as I mentioned, there's such fewer handhelds compared to home consoles. So it's a bit more difficult to kind of pinpoint the years at which. And then there's stuff like the Virtual Boy, which some people consider a home console, some people consider a portable. It's really weird, yeah.
Yeah. So, do you have anything else to say on this? Because, honestly, my answer is kind of simple. It's really like, you can't really include them in generations of consoles because they're just not.
Yeah. So if you do a handheld recap series, how would you organize it? Just chronologically?
Yeah, chronologically, and then I'd have to, like I said, I'm a little bit more foggy on where those specific borders sit, so I'd have to sit down and actually look at, like, okay, which ones are all of them, and then here's where they go, and then I would organize accordingly. But no part of me would be like, okay, and this is where it sits in video game console history generations, because it doesn't apply. That's all. So they're separate but equal, let's put it that way. So that's I realize that was a little short, guys, but I think that's really all we have to say on that. Like, it's not that complicated, I think.
Yeah, we have reached a consensus. We have spoken.
Though it is, again, to kind of, I mean, I know we've talked about generations, I think literally last month on this podcast.
Yeah, we did.
And as I said, I just did that video on the Switch and all that. That generations is a very convoluted subject to a lot of people because it's one of these things where it kind of has it has a relatively clear definition, not a crystal clear definition because there is no textbook definition of it. So people think it's open to interpretation when in reality it's really not. It's just like there's basic rules and we all kind of vaguely understand it without needing to write it down. And the thing I compare it to is like countries. I know we talked about this before. There is no crystal clear definition of what a country is. It's very vague. It's just like a landmass with a population and its own government. But that sounds accurate at first. It's like, okay, but that could apply to Hong Kong, which is no one would really make the case that Hong Kong's an independent country. But then it also doesn't apply to, say, the Vatican, which everyone says, yeah, that is a country. So in the end, what makes a country is, do other countries think it's a country? Yeah, all right, I guess it's a country. Kind of the same thing with video game console generations. It's like fans made up these borders and these basic criteria, but we all kind of essentially get it, yet there's dispute on, as there are with borders in real world, there's a dispute with borders in gaming, because people are like, no, that console spills into this side for this reason. No, it spills into that side for that reason. Generations are kind of fascinating, and personally, I don't think it's that hard to kind of draw lines and say, this is it for this reason. But some people think it's a matter of opinion. I that's the part that always weirds me out, is when people say, in my opinion, the Nintendo Switch is this. It's like, your opinion is irrelevant because it's already very clear what it is. It would be like saying, in my opinion, Italy is a country. I don't care what your opinion is. It is a country. Like, why are we debating this? In my opinion, Diego Garcia is a self-independent government, or whatever, when it's not. You know what I mean? It's just strange. That's all.
Yeah, because I'm sure both you and I, like, looking at video game console generations, we both have, I'm sure, our own opinions where, like, I would look at something like the SG-1000 or the, what was the first fourth gen system, or the first fifth gen one. It was
fifth gen FM Towns Marty.
FM Towns Marty. You see, I feel that feels more like a fourth gen, and I feel like the SG-1000 feels more like a second gen, but they're not. It's just,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I agree completely. That's the best way to put it. I completely agree. I feel that the Commodore Amiga CD32 looks like something that would have come out in the fourth generation. What I feel is irrelevant. It still happened in the fifth generation. That's where it occurred. I could feel, again, I did a video on this not too long ago, and I tried to use this argument, but I guess I could have been clearer. The Mattel Hyperscan, when you play it, it feels like a fifth gen console, but it came out in 2006. It is, if you even include it, it would technically be a 7th gen console by that argument. It's not even a console, it's a nothing, but it doesn't matter how you feel. Your emotions are irrelevant. Go with the Vulcan approach. Like, there are facts. Use them. That's all. That's when it comes to video game consoles. The consoles themselves are pretty clearly defined as to where they sit. The issue is really the blurriness of what a generation even is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, absolutely.
Yeah, again, it's like, I'm going to keep going back to the countries thing because I think it's a perfect way to explain this. There are border disputes around the world. Hell, I think Italy has a border dispute still with, like, Austria, I think. Or, like, even that. There's small little disputes over these random pockets of land. Yet we recognize that both of those places are countries. Just this one little area we're not sure about which side it falls on. But that doesn't mean like, oh, okay, therefore one of them isn't a country anymore. You can be unclear as to where the Switch falls in on some sort of, border dispute of what generation it's in because you don't totally understand the generation. But it's still, in of itself, is very clear. The Switch is an 8th gen console. Just stop already.
Yeah, the only, like, blurriness, like, in regards specifically to the Switch and a couple others, which I'll mention in a second, is that because of its hybrid nature, it arguably falls into both the generations of handhelds and the generations of home consoles.
Yes, I can see that point very specifically, but that's very unique to the Switch itself.
But even then, it's like, I've heard people refer to the Sega Nomad as a fourth gen video game, a fourth gen handheld system. I've heard people refer to the Turbo Express as a fourth gen handheld system. Yes, they are handhelds that released in the fourth gen, but they play the games of their home console equivalent. So they're not quite handhelds, but they're not quite home consoles. Especially the Nomad is effectively a Switch, because it plays full-size home console games, and you could hook it up to a TV, and you could also take it on the go. So it's, there's blurriness. It's not an exact science.
It's not, although I would argue with that one specifically. I mean, I did in my Switch generation video, so it doesn't even matter, but that's not the point of this. It's just, where does this, how do you define, I guess, where we put handhelds? And handhelds, the whole thing is they're their own separate thing. They have their own similar rules. Imagine just, there's two planets, and there's two Earths, and both of them run basically the same way. It's just that in one, on our Earth, you have Italy, and on other Earth, you have, not Italy, or whatever the hell it would be called. Space Italy. But it's the same governance rules apply. It's just that it's different. I don't know how else to put it, man. But anyway, I think we're good there. Let's move on. Thank you very much to Caleb for that. So the next subject comes from Connor Wright. And this is actually an interesting one, because I don't usually get questions that are actually about me or the channel specifically. It's usually like, let's discuss stuff. So this is a good one to actually have you on for, I think. He really wanted to talk about the channel's style, like cosmetically. I very much come off like a minimalist. Like, why is that? He was citing that, there's a lot of pressure from other YouTubers to have like slick graphics and intros and all that sort of stuff, and just do a ton of different things, like maybe an AVGN style video, or maybe like Red Letter Media, where get an entire warehouse and act out skits in the middle of your thing or whatever. But he's like, you're an odd throwback to the older YouTube, because you're basically just a guy sitting in front of a camera, and it seems to have been that way for over a decade. Like, why is that the case? So I don't need to just self-analyze. I think I can do that, but I figured you're here. I'm curious what you think of that.
I think it's very much to that last point that you made. I think it's charming and nostalgic in a weird way, because it does feel like an old school YouTube channel. It feels more like I've always found it ironic that we do this podcast, which is a podcast where we just talk about various subjects. And yes, it's scheduled, but your videos almost feel like podcast, things. There's not too much of a video element to them, unless you're doing like a cleaning thing, or you're showcasing a new Dreamcast game or something like that. But if let's say we were just talking about your console retrospective, you could like listen to just an audio version of of those retrospectives, and they serve a very similar purpose. Now, the style of YouTube videos nowadays from the newer generation of gaming content creators, your Scott the Waz's of the world, is a lot more dynamic. It's much more visual. And that's tied into the styles of videos that they make. Your videos are their exposition, effectively, for the most part. And so I don't see how like adding a bunch of fucking visual effects or graphics or more alternate camera shots or something like that is going to really change the content of your videos.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's true that over the years that has been, I guess I've been called lazy for that. But I mean, really, as you point out, it doesn't really contribute anything. Like, the goal I've always had was, I just want to be a guy having a discussion about whatever the subject matter is. So honestly, it does articulate that well. It's just a guy sitting there. It feels very realistic. Like, it doesn't feel like you're watching something that you're meant to be detached from as entertainment. It's supposed to come off like you're watching this video and we're just going to hang out and we're going to chat about something that you're obviously interested in because you clicked on the video. The only flaw with that is that I can't directly respond to you in a live stream type of way for the most part, unless it literally is a live stream. But I am probably better at responding to YouTube comments than I would think most YouTubers are. So I try to engage and just make it feel like an actual discussion. And that's kind of been presented through my style, or at least my intended style. But it's funny, it's had an unintended consequence. Largely the channel is, it gives people nostalgia, which wasn't really my goal. It just kind of happened because you are talking about retro things. And as the channel has aged, the things that I thought were neat or new or cool have now received new fan bases that are like, wow, I remember GameCube. He's got a video taking one apart. That's crazy. You know what I mean? Like, that was never the goal. But the channel itself is also... It is true. I don't deny it. It does look like a channel where I was shooting things in 2007. It doesn't look like I've changed much. And in of itself, that is nostalgic for people to be like, wow, there's a guy who's still doing it this way for some reason. And so the channel has just become a place for nostalgia all around, even though I don't maintain that was ever the intention. It just kind of happened that way. But really my thing was, I just want to have a conversation with people. And that, I think, is honestly really was the only goal. And so it's funny, though. I admit that I can be a pretty... I can speak too much. I talk a lot in my videos, obviously. And I think that... a lot of people wonder, like, am I writing all of this down? It's been brought up a lot of times, like, oh, you need to change your script. You need to stop scripting your videos, or do you script your videos? All that. I'm like, can you imagine?
Are you saying you're too wordy for YouTube? Inside
Precisely. Joke? Precisely. It's not even that inside of a joke. But I'm not going to go into that. But anyway, all right, here's all I'll say. One of the gaming YouTubers in this community who's been around for a while, I guess he did a panel at one point. Somebody asked him if they had ever watched one of my videos, and his exact response was, "That guy's too wordy for YouTube." And that was like 10 years ago. Doesn't even matter. It is somebody you guys would know. Let's put it that way. Anyway, yeah, all I'm saying is that I get, people ask me a lot of the time if I script videos or whatever. I'm like, no, I just sit down and I just talk, because that's really how it was. I think the original concept of YouTube was meant to be, and I'm just a nostalgic retro dinosaur throwback to that still, and I'm still lingering. I'm just still around. And I appreciate your Patreon support, because you guys make that possible. Because the truth is, and I'm very aware of this, like, if I wanted to explode and get like way more views and all that stuff, I would have to very much switch what this content of this channel is. I would have to start shooting things the way that we described before. And I would have to exclusively focus on essentially news. You have to talk about, all right, what did Nintendo do today that's going to make everybody mad? Microsoft totally drops the ball. I couldn't...
Cyberpunk, worst game ever?
Yeah, exactly. Like, top 10 reasons Cyberpunk is bad. Or whatever. I would not be able to live with myself. Like, I hate that. I am fully cognizant that my channel is ripe for that, but I don't want to do it.
Dude, how long did you resist, you've been doing this for a long time. It's like, how long did you resist, adding the smash that like button bullshit, ring the bell?
I don't think I've ever actually said ring the bell. I didn't even start telling people to hit the like button or like, comment, and subscribe. I think I only started last year.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like that's how ingrained you were in the fabric of doing things a certain way. And that's only really because you're being forced to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm being forced to do that because the truth is, like, there are certain algorithmic reasons you have no choice. Like, I'm not going to lie, dude. I'm going to be totally honest with you. Views on the channel are overall much further down than they've ever been, really, since I started. And it is, not a joke. Like, you do need these days something like Patreon to keep it afloat, because that's where you get with me, guys. You get a guy who could try to appeal to modern trends and change up the videos and try to make it that way. or I can stick with the content the way you guys have enjoyed it and the way I enjoy making it. But the downside of that is it doesn't really appeal to a lot of people. You have to be that type of dude who actually wants to hear out a conversation and hear out the material rather than get a quick fix of rapid fire information that may or may not be accurate, but is mostly entertainment purposes. And like, again, I cite things like top 10 reasons Cyberpunk is bad. And it's like those videos will only be a couple of minutes long. So they have that sort of appeal. They have a lot of quick energy. They show you rapid cuts of stuff. And they're like, number 10, the gameplay is broken. Number 9, this game doesn't look good, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, and that's popcorn YouTube entertainment, and I could not do that and be happy with myself. But I acknowledge there is a downside, which is this podcast in particular. I guarantee you this will not get over 2,000 views. It never does. And so I appreciate the Patreon support again, because that is the only thing that offsets things to allow the channel to continue to exist.
Yeah, I mean, you haven't even like broached the subject of many YouTubers doing sponsored videos now. It's like, this is done by Raid Shadow Legends or Manscaped or fucking.
You want to hear something? You want to hear something about me? I get those emails all the time. Like, do you want to shout out NordVPN? Do you want to do Lootbox? Do you want to do, Dollar Shave Club? And I'm like, dude, I don't even shave. Like, what? Why? How could I promote this? You know what I mean? I don't use VPNs. Like, all those things. I get those too, guys. But I don't take them because I would just feel like that's not what the channel is. Now, maybe that's naive of me, to not just embrace that. But I kind of like giving everybody a place of respite to escape that, to escape constant ads in your face, to escape, any sense of illegitimacy to the coverage. Like, it's true, without a doubt. Like, companies send me stuff all the time, but I'm sure you've noticed, like, I don't take any money for those things. And the reason I don't is because I want the ability to say negative things about it if the thing sucks. And I will say that if the thing sucks, because it doesn't benefit me to get free things that suck. So why would I care? You know what I mean? Like, if Rob's like, hey man, I can send you like, this is a dumb example, but let's just say Rob's like, hey man, I build TVs now. Can I send you a TV and you can do a review of it? And I get it. And it's like, it's only in black and white. It runs in 50 Hertz. It only uses like RF. And I'm like, Rob, your TV sucks. Like, I would have to say that because I'm not going to lie and be like, oh no, I want Rob to feel good because maybe he'll send me more broken, shitty TVs that I can't use. Why would I care about that? There's no motivation there. You think I would throw away the channel for like, seriously, like a $20 piece of junk TV or whatever in this scenario? So like, companies send me things, absolutely. But if they suck, I say that they suck. I only tell you exactly what I think. And if they're like, oh, well, we won't send you more of our crappy products. Wow, watch me worry. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care.
Yeah. No, absolutely, man. It's a level of authenticity that you don't find in a lot of channels nowadays. So it's like, I appreciate that. It's like, this is a no bullshit zone. It's a zone, like, it's a channel of honesty and just like, I'm a level with you and talk to you like a person as opposed to talk at you like a sideshow barker or something like that.
Right. Now, it's obvious. I do not dispute for a second that there aren't places that one could improve things. I'm not naive. I get it. Like, maybe the channel could improve with some slightly better coverage or whatever. I mean, it's funny, actually. People accuse me of, like, using a camera from, like, 2010. It's like, dude, I got a 4K Sony camcorder that I bought, like, a year ago. You know what I mean? Like, people just... But at the same time, I have to match the style. Because imagine if you came to my channel and it totally came off like a Scott the Woz video suddenly. It would probably... I would either be called a poser or it would piss off the entire base. Like, who knows? But it doesn't really matter. I don't intend to change things that much. Minor improvements here and there. I might get a new microphone, that type of stuff. But, I want to keep it honest as long as that's possible. And the truth is, and I don't mean to sound like a PBS commercial here, but the truth is that couldn't be done without viewers like you.
Yeah. And honestly, if you want to see a tangible evidence of the evolution and quality of Adam's camcorders, go back and look at his early videos and compare them to this, and you could actually see the titles of the games on your Genesis shelf behind you.
There you go.
You could do that now.
Early videos actually had Xbox 360 games back there.
Yeah, they did. I remember that.
Yeah, early videos were just the items on the table. I think it was like, no joke, like 3 years of that before I started doing anything else. But that's perhaps a discussion for another time. But hopefully that addresses your question, Connor, about what my style is and I guess why. The super short version is I just want to keep it honest, and I do not want to have to cater to any sort of corporate interest that does not appeal to me. I guess I would say with regards to sponsorships, like, I don't use Audible, so I'm not going to pretend that I do for money. Does that make sense? Okay. So thank you very much. But moving on, this is where we were going to do it. Well, actually, we probably would have done it earlier, but the whole thing with Keith and his crazy subject. But since he's not here, again, we hope him, we wish him well and hope he gets back soon. But instead, we had to kind of fill the void here, and I thought, what the hell? Let's talk about WandaVision.
Yeah.
But all right, let's be very clear here. This is obviously not video game related, and it's going to be full of spoilers. So if you haven't seen it, timecode as always is in the description. Switch around to whatever you want. But if you're interested in what we have to say on the WandaVision series, stay tuned. But again, this will be, I'm just saying it now, full spoilers. It will be in this. Anyway, so with that said, Rob, please tell me your thoughts on WandaVision or anything you have interesting to say about it.
I loved it. I really did. I think we've talked about this before. Like, we've had discussions on the MCU and kind of like that before. And I've always said that really I got very tired of it. The sameness of all of the movies and the TV shows, and it got too much. And like the Avengers movies that happened, 2 years ago now, they were great. They really were. I enjoyed the hell out of them. But I was so happy I was happy to just have that be in like a little end point for a while and take a break. Now, COVID is like the worst thing that's possibly happened in either of our lifetimes, but one upside of it, if you call it an upside, at least for me, is that it forced Disney to hit pause on their release schedule. So it made me kind of forced us to just take a step back and take a breath after just the heaviness of those Avengers, Infinity War and Endgames movies. And I really needed that. I needed to learn to just miss and love the Marvel movies again. And this release of WandaVision is really the first thing that they've done since, Spider-Man? When that came out, last year or the year before? And I really loved it. Because it was almost an interesting way of negating a lot of my concerns of just the sameness of so many of the Marvel properties and just the repetition and just like it just feel like the Marvel movies to me were starting to feel uninspired, and this is totally different, and that's why I liked it. There was an air of mystery. The way that it captured the different eras of television that it was parodying, from like the Honeymooners through like the Brady Bunch and Full House and Malcolm in the Middle and all that shit. Like it wore its affections for those eras of television on its sleeve, and it was so sincere in that, and I loved it because it just felt different. And then it started to pepper in kind of some of the Sword storylines, bringing in Kat Dennings' character from the Thor movies, and just kind of like unraveling the mystery of it. And and by the end, it kind of turned into just your generic Marvel CGI superhero fight in the final episode. Spoilers.
You said the whole thing was spoilers, so it's very good.
Yeah, so, at the end, I'm like, wow, I really enjoyed that. I want more. And I'm ready for the Falcon and Winter Soldier series that's coming out, I guess, like next month or something. It's coming very, very soon. And the Loki show, and I'm ready for more MCU movies. It was such a perfect palate cleanser after this forced break from COVID on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it was just a great way of just warming me up for it again.
So I essentially agree with most of that, so I just want to elaborate on a certain few areas. Overall, I liked it a lot. I really just kind of viewed it more as like a 4-hour long movie as opposed to a television show. And narratively, I think that it was great. It takes a little bit to get into because it's obviously initially you're like, what is this, for a while? And I think that's actually one of its biggest flaws, but it's not the fault of the narrative. It's the fault of the distributor, in this case, Disney. So I want to focus more on the business side of this. So for those who don't know, Disney, because of the pandemic, is doing horribly because they can't put much into production because of the pandemic. They can't have their parks open, and they can't release movies in theaters. Like, all three of their primary sources of income are basically cut off at the knees. So the only thing they have working for them is Disney Plus. That's their digital distribution network, and thus the perceived success of Disney is just how many subscriptions to Disney Plus are we getting. So because of that, they have to milk everything that they had in production prior to the pandemic. WandaVision was shot before the pandemic started, so they could at least begin editing and all that stuff throughout the course of the year, and that was fine. But their business model is still, I hope this changes, like when the pandemic's over and they can go back to a normal production cycle, because the problem is they're making content designed for streaming in marathon, yet they treat it like we're still in the 90s and you're supposed to watch an episode a week, which is not good for that particular type of show. I don't know if you remember this, but when the show started, I think they had released 2 episodes at once.
Yes, the first 2, yeah.
Almost all the feedback on the internet was like, what is this? This is terrible. And the reason people think that is because those first 2 episodes are unapologetic about how we're going to go full in to what you're seeing. This weird 1950s, 1960s, 1970s throwback with almost no explanation as to what the hell is going on. So because of that, you're like, am I really going to tune in to this again next week? I don't know what this is. Like, there are people who were legitimately believing it was supposed to be a sitcom. And the reason that's an issue is if all 9 episodes have been dumped at the same time, you might be like, okay, well, it's just going to keep auto playing and I'll just keep watching. Because when you think about it, the show's actually really short. Each episode, if you look at Disney Plus, is stated as 37 minutes, but it's not really that long because the credits, I noticed, are abnormally long in that show. The credits are 7 minutes per episode, and that's the end credits, not to mention the beginning credits and the last time on.
And there's no real, aside from a couple instances, there's no real end credits or mid-credit scenes that are in these. These are literally just names, yeah.
Yeah, well, except for a couple of the last few episodes actually do have credit scenes.
Yeah, the last one did, yeah, but
the last couple do.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, point is, there are a few that actually do, but it's very rare. And so I think only 2 or 3 of the episodes, so maybe 30% of the episodes have a mid-credit scene. Doesn't really matter. Point is that Disney is doing this because they want to keep subscribers installed. If the show is successful, that's an extra 8 or 9 weeks guaranteed people will keep their Disney Plus subscription or sign up, as opposed to what Netflix does, where they just dump an entire season of a show all at once. Now, I'm very much in favor of the dump the entire season all at once logic, because if you're designing shows that are meant to be viewed in the context of a marathon, then that's how you need to do it. I'll bring up Star Trek kind of as an example. If you were to look back at Star Trek, the original series, or TOS, or whatever, or sorry, TNG, every episode other than the 2-parters are self-contained stories and adventures. So it was made in an era where the model was, we're going to have a season of 20 episodes and we'll have 1 episode a week to keep people coming back to the show. But, you know, because this isn't an ongoing thing, you have to have a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the characters essentially have to always end up where they started off, except in two-parters, right? But in the streaming era, those restrictions are essentially gone. And as a result, people construct television now like it's a 4 or 5 hour long movie. That's how TV is, because it's not even really TV anymore. That's the problem I have with the way Disney Plus rolls stuff out, like with The Mandalorian. They do the same thing, where it's like, hey, we designed this to be one long movie, now let's break it up for like 3 months. I mean, imagine going in to see Avengers Endgame, and pretend for a second Avengers Endgame and Infinity War were one long movie you went to see it in a theater, and every half hour they told you have to leave and come back next week to see the next piece. You'd be like, this is kind of pissing me off. But it gets even worse in the current era we're in. Now, the reason I mentioned the internet feedback about the first 2 episodes, I need you to understand, yesterday was the day after the WandaVision finale came out. Yesterday was also the day that or at least at the time we're recording this. And so I watched all 9 episodes in the same day. I had never seen a single second of that show. I had intentionally been avoiding it as much as possible. Yet, despite that, I was still aware of how people perceived the pilot. I was still aware that there's that weird X-Men Fox Universe crossover. I was aware of way too many things just because of cultural zeitgeist. Because you go onto Twitter and it's like the first thing you see is like, look, a spoiler for no reason. Like, I think someone actually tweeted at me and was just like, dude, could you believe how they brought the X-Men into WandaVision? And I was like, thanks. Like, you just cannot release shows in that model anymore, the old model, because we live in the era of a tweet can go around the world and destroy the story for everybody in 2 seconds. And for those of us who want to watch the show the way it was narratively intended, which is all at once, it's really difficult to cut yourself off from the internet for like 2 months while they finish. You know what I mean?
I do. I mean, I really see it both ways, honestly. There are certain shows like, you know, the Cobra Kai shows, you know, on YouTube and then on Netflix for the 3rd season. Those were such binge-worthy little bite-sized things that they worked really well in, as you said, telling like this long kind of overarching story as like a 6-part movie or whatever. And like, yeah, it was so easy to binge those. But there are also just times where I don't want to just like sit down over 2 days and just like marathon something. I see the appeal in that. Sometimes, like as you said, like as the movie was intended to be seen, or the show was intended to be seen. But I don't know, like even when I am like binging something, I even just take a break a couple days. I'm like, you know, I don't want to burn through this. You know, I'm enjoying it too much. And I think to the point of both WandaVision, especially The Mandalorian, you hit the nail on the head when you said it was part of the cultural zeitgeist on the internet of every week there was kind of like the water cooler talk of okay, here's the memes from this week's episode, and like of Baby Yoda, or
oh yeah, look, that guy's arm is exposed. It's an action figure.
Exactly. So like I like the idea, like I like the concept of that, where it's just like it gives you a chance to maybe rewatch an episode and get a second viewing on it and see things that you might have missed, or think about the ramifications of something that happened in the episode. Like, oh yeah, of course, like the X-Men fucking cameo. I messaged you right after I saw it. I'm like, yo, did you see it? Like, are you watching WandaVision? I didn't spoil anything, but I'm like, are you watching WandaVision? You're like, no way, I'm waiting to binge it. Because I'm like, I wanted to fucking talk about that.
Yeah, but but the fact that you even brought it to my attention tells me that it's like, okay, great. Now there's going to be something I need to know, and now I need to avoid.
Yeah. So... but I just, you know, I like kind of giving things space to breathe sometimes. It's not every show. Like, I'm more than happy to binge certain things, but I also just like to kind of spread out the love and, you know, just be like, oh, I kind of want to sit in this for a little bit. Like, when a new season of Mandalorian comes out, which we talked about last month or the month before, of like how much we loved it, because you hadn't seen it until you binged all 2 seasons of it. where I'm just like, man, it's like I just loved being in that mode for like 10 weeks or whatever, where it's like, oh, we got new Star Wars, like some new input kind of thing for me to consume and think about and obsess about over the next week.
And
maybe I'm old, maybe I'm old fashioned, but it's like
you're following the old TV model of liking. First of all, I have to admit, I'm biased in this because you can ask some of my friends who I hung out with before streaming was a thing, and they always thought I was insane because my method for watching a television show is like Smallville, right? Like, okay, that show was out for 10 years, came out in 2001, ended in 2011. I saw like a couple episodes back in like, let's say 2003, and I was like, this is good, I'm gonna not watch it until it's over. And my friends are like, why? And I'm like, I want to marathon it. And they're like, what the hell is a marathon? Like, they didn't understand like why I would do that. And no joke, I didn't make any sense to anybody. I would buy the DVD or the Blu-ray when it was out, and then I would just put it away. And I would wait, and I would wait, and I would wait until the show was over. And then all of a sudden it's like, all right, now let's watch 10 years of Smallville all at one go. And that's exactly how I always did it. My friend used to cite that. He's like, dude, you kind of accidentally invented how everybody watches TV now, because you just sit there and you would watch everything in marathon and you wouldn't do it until the show was over, or at least until it had like a giant amount of content, like, you know, Simpsons or South Park, for example. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly how I do it. It's just a me thing. I only want to watch stuff in bulk. But the difference was, say, you know, a Smallville or a South Park or Simpsons versus, say, The Mandalorian or, obviously what we're talking about, WandaVision, is that those shows were meant to be episodic. So you didn't necessarily have to do that. There's little nods and there's over arcs, you know, that help. But you don't have to do it. But these shows do require that, and that's what bothers me the most about the way Disney distributes it, is because they're still using that old model. And I'm hoping that goes away when the pandemic goes away and they have more content, because as we mentioned before, right now they're stretching things thin because that's all they've got left. I mean, that's why we're getting the Snyder cut, because HBO Max needs content and they can't produce anything, but they have all this footage of the Snyder cut sitting around, and that's why they put their own movies out on there, all that sort of stuff. You know what I'm talking about. But the part that bothers me is that probably won't happen, only because this model is actually working for Disney, where they're like, well, wait a minute, we have 9 episodes and we guarantee people sticking around for at least 9 weeks instead of 9 hours, you know? And so why not just keep doing that? And it's really just going to be guys like me who are going to be the victims of that, because we're going to want to watch it, but we have to wait. And meanwhile, we live in the internet culture where a single tweet can destroy the entire thing for you. Like, let's talk. I don't want to say any specifics on The Mandalorian. I think we did talk about it. But all I'll say is the end of Mandalorian Season 2 was meant to be a big reveal, crazy thing. But within 5 seconds of it being out, it was all over my Twitter thread and all over trending and all that sort of shit. And you're just like, oh, okay. So then when you're actually watching it, you're like, well, I guess I have no reason to be invested now. Lame. You know what I mean?
I absolutely do. That's the risk that you run, like, in a situation like this. If you I mean, the internet is such an echo chamber of like what people are talking about. And like, I've had so many things spoiled for me. Like, even before, I didn't see a movie the first night. And then it's like, I go to see it the next day, and it's like, oh, well, something's fucking spoiled because some dipshit on Twitter fucking, tagged me or something, yeah.
I wish I could remember what movie it was. There was a movie in, I want to say, 2009. I don't know. It was kind of a big deal. Maybe it was, Star Trek 09. I don't remember exactly what it was. And, I had this friend who just loved spoiling movies for people, but he didn't understand that bothered people because he didn't care about spoilers. So I remember once he just came over, and he was like, did you see the new Star Trek movie? And I was like, no, not yet. And he was just like, oh, dude, fucking Spock comes back in time and they blow up Romulus and the whole timeline changes. And I'm like, I really didn't want to know that. You know what I mean? Like, he just... So that that's part of why I hate spoilers too. It's just I want to enjoy the content, the exciting thing you just saw and the way you got to feel about it. I wanted that, and you just took that from me for no reason.
Yeah. No, I agree. But I mean, overall, like, just to get back to the subject.
Yeah, get back to the actual show at hand. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, did you like it?
Oh, hell yes. As you pointed out, we got an unintentional break from the MCU due to the pandemic and the fact that Black Widow never actually got released. And I still don't know what they're going to do with that, because I think there's just like, we just need to wait till theaters are open.
I think they're banking on that, honestly, being I don't know what I would refer to as like a cultural touchstone movie, similar to
like the Welcome Back movie.
No, not like, but also aside from the Avengers movies, the movies that Marvel has done recently that have been real cultural touchstones, that people talked about as being greater than just it being a simple Marvel movie, are Captain Marvel and Black Panther, due to the representation of persons of color and women as, like, for the first time as, like, the leads in these Marvel movies. And I think I mean, you can say whatever you want about that.
That's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's just say that I think that's an absurd statement, but not that I know what you're echoing. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. So, they're important to some people for other reasons, and I think
they're important to people who have never heard of movies before.
Yeah, so I think they're maybe hoping that Black Widow is like, oh, it's another, like, female-led movie. We're going to try and get it like Captain Marvel or like the first Wonder Woman in 2017, of just like being this big thing, that people can kind of galvanize around. Yeah,
wasn't Captain Marvel 2019?
No, I said Captain Marvel, and I said Wonder Woman from 2017. Like,
my bad. Yeah, no, I got you. Whatever. It also has to do with the fact that, I think that you remember the failed Mulan experiment on Disney Plus, where they would charge you like $30 to, I think if that had panned out, then they would have released Black Widow that way. But for those who don't know what we're talking about, there was that terrible live action Mulan movie that Disney made. They were like, hey, we're not going to put it in theaters because of the pandemic, but if you have Disney Plus, you can pay us an extra $30 on top of your subscription and get to see the there And everybody was like, no. like, isn't the whole point of your service that I don't have to do that? Now, I think there is some sort of premium package on Disney Plus for stuff like that now. But just so people are clear, like, Black Widow needs its theatrical run to make a profit. Like, there's not enough money to be made on that particular investment on Disney Plus. You have to build stuff specifically for Disney Plus in order to make money back on it. That movie was constructed with the understanding there would be a theatrical release, which is why they're sitting on it. And in Disney's case, I don't know the specifics of that particular property, but I know with Marvel, with Warner Brothers and HBO Max. You remember how, like, Wonder Woman 84 was supposed to get a theatrical run, but it didn't really happen because of the pandemic. So, like, screw it, we'll put it on HBO Max. Then they gave it a small run anyway. So the reason for that was due to some sort of share agreement that had pre-existed because nobody knew the pandemic was coming. It was a very standard thing. You pay the investors, right? And the investors expect the movie to go into theaters at a certain time. And if it's delayed for any reason, that's really owned up to the distributor. In this case, it would have been Warner Brothers. So in other words, Warner Brothers was having to pay the investors while the movie wasn't in theaters. So there was no money coming in. So eventually HBO is like, okay, let's try this. We'll just put it up on streaming, and then we'll give it a small theatrical run to just kind of satisfy the contractual agreement and be done with this. It was a loss leader just to get more people over to HBO Max. At least that's what it evolved into. And that's why they're doing that with a lot of their stuff, because they have no choice. They're hemorrhaging money on it. In their case, they're all right because AT&T is their parent company, and AT&T is doing amazing because everybody's inside. But that's not going to work for Disney. So in Disney's case, I don't know the specifics, but I hope that they wholly own that movie. and then they're not sitting around paying random investors. For those who don't know about this, when, let's say, Paramount's like, hey, I'm going to go and make a new Star Trek movie, guys, it's not Paramount paying for it. They typically go out and they find some rich guy. Maybe it'll be a rich oil tycoon in Texas or something. What was that movie? Entourage, the movie, actually explained this relatively well. If you ever saw the Entourage movie, movies are not paid for usually by the major companies like Universal, Paramount, Disney, whatever. They're paid for those companies want the movies, they own it, but they need cash. So they go to random Joes all over the world and say, hey man, give us $30 million to make this movie. And, we'll give you like 1.5% of the gross and your money back type of thing, whatever. It's just an investment for a lot of people. But when you don't release the movie, you start running into problems and the investors want their money back and then some. Get it?
Yeah, no.
So I don't know the specifics of what Disney did with theirs, and maybe they're holding on to it because they just paid for it with all that fat Marvel cash they were getting, and they didn't have to deal with random guys investing. I don't know. But if that was the case, it would make sense why they can just kind of sit on it indefinitely.
Yeah, it's such a weird time that we're living in because you're having to reckon with the pandemic and its effect on the entire entertainment industry, but also just like the way these companies have been operating or had been planning to operate due to their investors or their financial outlooks or whatever, their expectations of these properties. So it's such a weird time, and it's kind of hard to speculate on a lot of this stuff without really knowing the inside and out of these corporations that kind of have their plans.
I'm sorry, guys. I know we keep kind of going right back to all the businessy stuff instead of the actual show. We were like full spoilers, but we barely talk about the show. The show itself was great. I really enjoyed it. It really hooked me. Like everybody, I watched the first couple episodes and I'm like, this is really weird, but I'm on board. I assume this will go into a direction that makes sense. And eventually it's like, yes, of course it does. And it's a great expansion to all of these characters. And I loved, as you pointed out very briefly, like you have certain but appropriate throwbacks. Like the, what was her name? Cat Williams? Is that what you said?
Kat Dennings.
Kat Dennings, sorry. Kat Dennings comes back to play the character she's been playing since whatever it was when Thor 1 came out, like 2011-ish, I think, when Thor 1 came out. So, I mean, that was 10 years ago. And so she plays that character, but she's logical in that position. Like that's exactly her character's job and role always was. Makes sense. You don't just shoehorn in cameos for no reason. And then that dude who was in Ant-Man, who's the FBI agent,
Jimmy Woo's character.
Yeah, there you go. He's in there. The only thing that was weird about it, and they do mention this, is that he got suddenly relocated out to the East Coast. Just probably because they're like, well, he was originally in San Francisco. He couldn't be in this story unless he randomly has a reason to be in New Jersey.
They brought like I forget I don't know the actress's name, but she plays Rambeau. The black sword agent, and she was the little girl in Captain Marvel, like the daughter of Captain Marvel's so it's like the way they're introducing like the characters, like it makes sense. It's all logical. Like they're not just like, let's put, I don't know, Falcon in here for some reason.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm
War
trying to
Machine
say.
In. It's like it all makes sense.
They give you appropriate enough old connections that make sense. And then at the same time, they go forward and they build on a lot of possible outcomes. So we'll talk about that separately. But before let's wrap up the backlog stuff. What I guess I'm trying to say is the show does not consist of a bunch of member berries, to quote South Park. It's not like, hey, remember Thor? Here's Thor. He just showed up. He's here. He's Thor. Like he has no reason to be there. But the Cat Williams. Kat Dennings, whatever. I keep saying, sorry.
I don't even know her character's name. It's just Kat Dennings.
Yeah, exactly. It's just Kat Dennings. Kat Dennings' character makes 100% sense to be there. And thus she is there. And that's one of the best things I like about it. They didn't just arbitrarily, like it doesn't end with a random shot of Nick Fury showing up and be like, Kat Dennings, we need you for the Avengers 2 initiative. No pointless randomness that doesn't need to exist. I think it was flawlessly executed in that way. So when we're talking about the possibility of the future, I think that, people were talking about the whole X-Men thing, and before it wrapped up, everybody's speculating on like what Quicksilver being there means and all that sort of stuff. And then by the end, they're like, "Oh, it's not really him; it's some other guy with this."
I'm sorry, that's a red herring.
I agree completely. Like, you'd have to be an idiot to think otherwise. Like, so you're suggesting they went to all the trouble of casting the same guy who played Quicksilver, who actually played the same character in a different continuity, just to not use that?
But
you know what? Nuts?
But you know what? I mean, that's why I think this show is so clever and self-aware, because the first reaction from Kat Dennings' character as she's watching this episode, where Pietro is like, they recast Pietro. It's like, that's such a television thing that would absolutely have happened in like a 1980s sitcom, where it's just like, the other guy died, or is like a drug addict.
So they obviously reference Bewitched a lot, and that's like perfect.
Exactly.
Bewitched famously recast Darren with no explanation of any kind. Not that this is important, but there's actually on one of the DVDs, because I've actually watched that show through, that when they get to that season, there's actually a behind the scenes thing about like why they did that, and it really just boiled down to the first actor. Dick York and Dick Sargent. Dick York had a back problem, and he was just unable to do the show anymore. And so they actually sat down, they had a meeting about what to do. They're like, we can do an episode where he gets changed and it's permanent for some reason, or whatever. And they ultimately decided that the best course was just no one in the universe acknowledge it. It just goes forward, because the idea was that Sam would love him no matter what. And I call bullshit on that terrible, terrible logic. But
hey man, well, not exactly, but it's like the same thing happened in the MCU. You had Terrence Howard getting swapped out for Don Cheadle after
Howard, and of course, famously Edward Norton.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting swapped out. So it happens even in that universe of events. It does occur. So, but all right, and then they give you that red herring about, oh no, it's just some guy who's under a spell and whatever. I don't buy that for a second, and I know you don't either. But it's pretty obvious when you kind of follow some of this Marvel stuff that they're playing around with dimensions. I know the Spider-Man thing, everyone's expecting like, possibly Tobey Maguire and
into the Spider-Verse live action.
Yeah, exactly. So the question has been, what are they going to do with the X-Men now that Disney has them back from Fox, because they acquired Fox? They're not worried about the Fantastic Four, because nobody remembers those versions really, of like Jessica Alba one, or terrible like Josh Trank one. But X-Men was around for like 20 years. And so everybody's very familiar with Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. Like, what do you do with all this? And the Quicksilver connection, I think, was a great idea. Not that this matters anymore, but for those who don't know, when Fox had the X-Men, they had they had all the characters exclusively save two, which was the Scarlet Witch, aka Elizabeth Olsen's character, and Quicksilver. In both cases, they both had the right to use those characters, no matter what they wanted to do with them. Which is, so I guess behind the scenes, they must have made a deal saying like, okay, we'll use Scarlet Witch even though we can technically use Quicksilver, and you can use Quicksilver even though you can technically also use Scarlet Witch, because they're brother and sister. They're the children of Magneto officially. So in the X-Men universe, they focused more on Quicksilver, and I think Scarlet Witch is technically there as like his little sister in one of the movies, but they're like, they don't really acknowledge her much. And in the MCU, there was a Quicksilver, but he's like the only Avenger who ever just died off. Right? So they're like, that'll be our agreement, and then we'll stay out of each other's, sandboxes. Essentially was, I think, how they were doing it. But because of that, you technically have these two Quicksilvers, and therefore it's the logical option if you want to try and do anything with that. So bringing this back around, when the MCU deals with the X-Men, you can either go the Darren approach of just, hey, remember all those X-Men? That didn't happen. I don't know what you're talking about. This is the X-Men now. Or you can do something zany with it. And I think that's more likely what they're going to do. It's going to be dimensional stuff. I would actually, I'm not even kidding, because the X-Men universe has a couple of good movies, but on the whole, it's a clusterfuck of insane.
Yeah, absolutely.
That does not hold together at all. And so honestly, the best move would be something akin to like the entire X-Men universe we saw was literally like a bubble created by Scarlet Witch unintentionally. Like everything that ever happened there was a pocket dimension by her, and Quicksilver was the key to link them together or something to that effect. I don't want the Fox X-Men to exist in the same universe as the MCU, because they do not coexist. They cannot, given the nature of those stories and how overlapping that would be, and how hard it would be to reason that how is it possible none of the X-Men ever joined the Avengers or any of that? Like, it's just fucking crazy. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Listen, like, we actually did an entire topic about this like 6 months ago on the podcast, like talking about kind of the DC and the MCU kind of movies going forward, and we both agreed that the next front on this war of DC versus Marvel is multiverse. We did that early last year. The CW shows all crossed over, and they brought in Kevin Conroy, and they brought back the guy from Smallville and all this shit. To tease a DC universe, like multiverse. Marvel started with the Spider-Verse, and
I don't know if that really counts because Sony did that on their own.
Yeah, but still, it's Marvel.
I get you, but I just want to point out the technicality.
So the MCU multiverse is really kicked off with this. It's kicked off with what's his name as J. Jonah Jameson in
that actually is the beginning, I think.
Yeah, and it's going to be solidified. I know exactly how you're going to explain the Fox X-Men and the Fox Fantastic Four and the Sony.
I don't think you have to explain Fox Fantastic Four.
Well, no, there's easy way of explaining it. It's in different universes, just like DC, and what's going to kick it off is the Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness movie, which is coming out, I believe, next year or the year after, which Scarlet Witch is going to be in. They confirmed that she's going to be in this movie. And it's probably going to be explained away that's like, when you created this bubble universe, you didn't have Pietro's body to recreate him like you did Vision, so you actually manifested him from another fucking universe. And
technically she didn't have his body either.
Oh yeah, right. But she had him as she was the Mind Stone, she was created by, I don't know. It was some explanation.
I'm sure you can come up with a million different excuses. I'm just saying technically that's not accurate. That's all.
Yeah, but I'm sure they're going to be able to explain it's there are a million fucking multiverses, and you tapped into this one that existed, and Deadpool's going to come over because he's the fucking easiest because he breaks fourth wall anyway.
Deadpool's perfect for that.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember writing a tweet at one point I sent to Ryan Reynolds, not that he would have ever responded, but I'm like, Deadpool 3 should really be called Deadpool 3-boot. Yeah, and it's just the idea of because he even in those first two movies, he's aware that he exists in the Fox X-Men universe, and that the Fox X-Men universe is totally screwed up, because he's like, are we talking about McAvoy or Stewart? I don't know which is which anymore. These are so, how come you are the only X-Men I ever see? It's almost like the studio cheaped out, all sorts of stuff.
Well, and he references Josh Brolin as Thanos.
He calls him Thanos. Yeah, it's actually perfect. He can be the one guy who is totally aware of all this, and I think Kevin Feige even said they want to kind of retroactively include those. So I'm curious. They're going to do something to that effect to kind of say parts of the Fox X-Men universe are canon. You can argue that they were all canon, but they were in this pocket dimension, and here's the stuff we're going to pluck out and say this will remain with us, and that'll be mostly Deadpool, maybe Quicksilver, and possibly a couple other random ones. As much as I like the idea of Hugh Jackman coming back, it's been 20-something years. It's been 22 years since X-Men 1. 22 years. The dude's too old to keep playing Wolverine.
And he said he doesn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, he said that after every movie. But at the same time, it's been 22 years. Let the man rest. You can get other X-Men. That's fine. I mean, you remember... Actually, one of the other things they might do... Check this. You remember in WandaVision when stuff would go into her bubble thing, and then it would pop back out, and the car was half a tank, and now it was half a minivan?
Yeah.
Imagine the Fox X-Men all having to go through something like that and coming out as totally recast people.
Yep.
Think about it, guys. Think about it.
It's science fiction. You could do whatever the fuck you want, and it's
exactly.
you could come up with some bullshit fucking metaphysical like magic bullshit to explain why things are recast or why this X-Men is different than the X-Men that you all know and love or pretend you love.
I mean, that would actually be the approach I would go. Is literally just they went through the Wanda bubble and they all got changed. Like visually, and maybe it changes their personality, assuming you care to keep any of that stuff as part of your tapestry. That's the key, and I think they're going to do something to that effect only because they obviously want to keep Deadpool in there. But I think I guess Quicksilver, debatably, but the rest of them, I feel like just let it go, man. Just don't try to keep any of those people. Like they're either too old or they're not interested in playing the characters anymore. Or the truth is, if you keep McAvoy was great. But you keep him, it comes with a lot of continuity baggage. And the MCU cares about its continuity. Like, it really does. Like, probably more than any other major franchise that's, at least in the film history. So, to say, like, okay, we've just decided all of the X-Men movies, they totally just happened. Which is really difficult because you inherit all of their problems when you do that. So, a clean break is not necessarily the right approach, but a controlled break maybe that's kind of like a soft reboot before that became a concept. I don't know exactly what we would call this, but that might be the approach I think they need to go with the X-Men.
Yeah, you know what? They should just recast Patrick Stewart as Tom Hardy because he's played Patrick Stewart before. So
it's true, he really did. Star Trek Nemesis, everybody.
Yep. Anyway, I think that about wraps it up. I think we've been talking about this for like an hour now.
Yeah, long story short, WandaVision good. Go see.
Yes, go see.
All right. Anyway, so let's move on. We just have a round of shout-outs here. So everyone who's here is a Patreon backer who is at the tier in which they get to do that. Again, if at any time you want to join the Patreon to support the channel, to get shout-outs, to get early access to videos, to get subjects chosen, or even be on the podcast, you can do that. Again, the link's in the description. But for those shout-outs, we got Julian Espinoza, Michael Kelly, Luis Bonilla, Joseph Tamburino, and Trey Wagner. Once again, that's Julian Espinoza, Michael Kelly, Luis Bonilla, Joseph Tamburino, and Trey Wagner. Now, thank you, everybody. Moving on, we've got our boy Abdullah. Welcome back, Abdullah. We kind of missed you last month when we got like that cameo from you for like 5 minutes before your mic crapped out on us.
Yeah, it was a bit of an issue, but hopefully this time it's not, and we can proceed normally. I do hope another problem doesn't happen, though.
You wanted to, as always, pick a subject, and I like the one you got here for us, so I'm going to read out what I think you're going for, but feel free to correct me. So, why do we buy games when we used to buy them and play them immediately? Now it's becoming more of a, like, we just kind of sit on them for a while, more or less the idea of playing versus collecting and, like, what changed. Is that about right?
Yeah, you're getting there. That's almost the point I'm trying to say. And yeah, I mean, that's the basic premise. Mostly it's just because, it's been more of what comes with the game now rather than the game itself. I see that being more of the focus on the current generation of video games compared to what it was before.
When you say what it comes with, do you mean like DLC, or do you mean like, collector's editions, or things it doesn't come with, like a manual? I mean, what do you mean by that?
Oh, okay. I need to clarify that more. So I'm referring to things like collector's editions, deluxe edition. You get like trillions of editions of the same game at once, and I don't know. I mean, this wasn't the case before.
Okay. See, that's not where I thought you were going with this subject, so it's kind of nice. It's actually refreshing. Because I thought that we were going to basically talk about, like, we used to play games immediately and now we don't, and the why is that? And I was just going to say it's because we're older and that's just what happens. But it was like end of discussion. But no, I like this because I get what you're saying. Like, there is a saturation of collector's editions for specific games, and it is weird, and it's also kind of an odd thing for us to analyze, because as we go closer to an all digital era, which is, I think, even though all of us are physical guys, we acknowledge that that is coming. It also seems that the resistance to that, which would actually be guys like us who are into physical media, it seems like that resistance is growing into an unexpected direction, which isn't just, oh, we'll continue to get physical editions. It's that we want our physical editions to be absolutely baller crazy. Like, we want our collector's edition to come with action figures of all the characters in the games, or at least that's what they seem to think we want. Because I hadn't thought about this until you're saying it now. You're absolutely right. Collector's editions are becoming more and more frequent, and they're becoming more and more elaborate. And I don't know how much I care. You know what I mean? It's like, it's one of these things where I feel like this is what they think guys like us want. And maybe in a handful of cases that's going to be true. But on the most part, with collector's editions, I have to really be into that game to care enough to get like a version that has all this random stuff. What do you guys think?
So, I think the collector's edition kind of market that has really exploded in the past, I would say like 10 to 15 years. Before that, we had various maybe deluxe editions of games with extra things in them, but this idea of the art book, soundtrack, collectibles, stickers, statue, again, all of the above has really kind of just happened in the past 10 years. And I think you brought up an interesting point, Adam, where you think, oh, these companies believe this is what we want as physical media collectors, when in reality, I think the explosion in the creation of limited edition games with all of the extra accoutrement is because of the rising cost of actually producing the games, that the companies that are the publishers of these games need to justify the cost that it takes to create them by offering these large special editions to help offset the cost. Because up until really this past year, video games had been a standard $60 price tag for the past 15 years. So, and despite inflation and the rise in the cost of developing video games, there was never a rise in the standard cost to buy a video game at retail. So these collector's editions are a way of offsetting that cost. In addition, the interesting thing is, nowadays, especially from companies like Ubisoft, and even Sega did this with Sonic Mania, the collector's edition. Just because you get a collector's edition with all of this extra bullcrap in it, doesn't mean you get a physical disc. A lot of these collector's editions only come with a download code for these things. So you're really just paying to get all of this extra stuff, and not the physical disc anymore.
I want to jump on that, but first I want to let Abdullah get a shot. So go ahead, man.
All right. So first of all, thank you guys for you guys said most of the points I wanted to mention, but it is important to note, and as Rob said, it's been the past 10, maybe 15 years these things have exploded. Because if you see it in the older games, in the 4th generation or 5th generation, even the 6th, it's kind of weird to find collector's editions like the ones or like the way we have it now. It's not usually, for example, you'd find something. I mean, the collector's editions are even bigger than the console itself. I mean, there's so many examples that you would get, and actually there are people who get confused, is that the console with it or not? Because of the way they've done these collector's editions. I'm not against them, but I'm leaning towards what you said, Adam, in your point. If it's something I really want, then I'll get it. But overall, I think this collector edition thing has exactly been oversaturated because we're losing the value of what we actually want, which is the game.
Yeah. So, okay, I agree with you. But I want to attach to what Rob said, because you brought up something kind of interesting, and I want to make sure it's clear to people. First of all, I know people are going to point out, like, collectors of editions have been around forever, and I think we all acknowledge that. The difference is how it's become so much bigger, to the point where collecting is supposed to be a niche thing. It's supposed to be kind of an underground movement. But now we have more like the only thing that even comes out is the collector's edition, which doesn't make any sense.
They've become a norm. That's what it's.
You're right.
they're
Exactly. It's not a niche thing. It's now the standard, at least with a lot of physical releases. Not all, obviously, but at least big ones. Or, you know, they do have a lot of niche ones, like Limited Run Games does, like half of them are collector's editions. But again, you know, whatever. But Rob, what you said was they have to justify the costs. So in order to make a physical edition in the first place, they have to bundle it with all this other stuff. And I want people to understand that's actually kind of genius, because let's say there's a collector's edition of some indie game, and the collector's edition comes with the game, and it comes with a music CD, and it comes with a little statue, or you know, whatever, a couple of just random things, and they're like, okay, the price of that is like $200. Now that's a big pill to swallow, but at the same time, you look and you see all these things, and you're like, okay, you know what? I think I can justify it. I'm super into this game. That makes sense. But the reason they can get away with that is all that stuff is just cheaply made stuff made in China that they're paying much less on. So they're actually probably making more off of these collector's editions, considering the low investment that goes into producing them in the first place. And I think one of the greatest all-time examples where they tried that and it actually failed was the Fallout 76 set. If you remember that, with where they promised people that really nice bag, and they gave them this crappy, like, door prize bag type of thing. Where I think they even got in a lawsuit over that, and they lost. Or at least I know they had to promise to give real bags to people. But I think that's basically the model there is, look, we're going to take the fact that we know our game will be successful and make this super expensive edition that comes with like $8 worth of crap, and we'll charge like 100 times more for it. That's interesting. I hadn't really considered any of this until we were all just sitting here talking. So see, Abdullah brings like the thought-provoking subjects. Because again, I thought this subject was going to be like, why don't you play more games when you're older? It's like, because we're older, like, end of subject. But no, good. I like it.
The one last thing that I'd like to bring up about these collector's editions is the interesting parallel between... Now, I'm not sure how it is in the UAE, Abdullah, but in America, like, I work at a video game store, and we get in collector's editions and trade all the time. And for the most part, the collector's editions hold their value a lot more, and sometimes even increase in value over a standard disc edition. The interesting thing is, and I guarantee you Adam has seen this too, in Japan, it's the exact opposite. Because
yes.
living space is at such a premium in Japan that these collector's editions rot in secondhand stores and in these media shops, because nobody wants these giant statues and stuff. They want the physical disc and the standard edition, because otherwise it would take up way too much room in their small house. So when you go to a book off or a hard off or even like a Super Potato or something like that in Japan, you'll see these collector's editions there, and they're oftentimes the same price or even cheaper than the standard editions. So it's really interesting just how the perspective changes where you are. And I'm actually curious to hear what the market looks like, secondhand, especially in the UAE.
I so want to jump on that Japanese stuff, but first, yeah, Abdullah, you answer him, and then I'm just going to go at Rob about this.
All right, okay. The way it is in the US is similar here. I wouldn't necessarily say exactly the same. When you talked about Japan, and you said some of them lose their retail value or even go lower. I'm pretty sure, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. In the US, if you have a game if you lose demand, definitely you're gonna lose. People are not gonna want to buy this, or they're gonna lose the value. But overall, collector's editions usually remain relatively higher in value as time goes forward. However, if the people, let's say the gaming community here is not there's no high demand for it, store owners, at least private store owners, not retail, would actually lower the price to a very interesting point. Not sure about specifics, but it really is a function of demand, and overall generally similar to what you have in the US, I believe.
So you made me think of something, and it also ties in with what Rob said. So I want to ask you a question. You guys have collector's editions. Now, how often do you see those collector's editions for sale at a retail store versus how often do you see them only for sale online?
Here?
Yes.
Okay, so here I don't really buy a lot from online retailers. Usually, uh, the online people are the same ones that I go to, so physically. Uh, so I think, as I told you, really it depends on the demand. However, when it comes to finding them, usually it'll be common for me to find them, at least from my experience, I'd find them easier with a retailer than I'd find them with than finding them online in terms of the price. Because online it would really depend on the demand. If there is good demand for it, you may find it online, but too expensive. So you'd want to wait for a retailer better. So I would say
Okay.
in the beginning of the release, you'd find them both ways. But as time goes forward, I think it leans more towards online, but there is a chance you might find it at a retailer, and that would probably be the official price.
Okay, so that's interesting because I can't speak for all Americans' experience in this. I mean, obviously Rob's different, but Rob also works in a video game specific store. But you made me think about this as you guys were talking, which is we have collector's editions throughout the US, obviously, but as I was sitting there thinking about it, like, let's say I wanted some relatively new game and it's collector's edition. A lot of the times it'll either be a small run type of thing that only somebody like limited run games will have, or it'll be exclusive to a store specifically like GameStop. When it comes to collector's editions, I don't usually see them at things like Best Buy or Target unless it's literally like major games like Cyberpunk or like Fallout 76 when it came out or whatever, Skyrim, I remember. And in those instances, you'll find that the ones they have are the ones that are literally just the big super AAA games, like the one that everybody's waiting for all year long. And then those boxes tend to be huge. And I can't help but wonder if those type of games and retailers, they stopped dealing with the big ones just because they got burned so much. I mean, I don't know if you remember this, Rob, but there was a phase there for like a year where you could go into any Best Buy anywhere in the United States, and I guarantee you they would have had Fallout 76 collector's editions just laying around everywhere because they couldn't get rid of them.
That was the thing that it wasn't just Fallout. It's the collector's editions that I see primarily in a Best Buy, or I rarely go there, but like a GameStop setting, are games that have special editions that weren't popular or they weren't successful, and they just are left to rot there. So ironically, the ones that I see in for brand new sealed ones, more often than not, are clearanced or on sale and have just been sitting there for so long because nobody wants them.
Right, but those stem from big games to begin with, or what were supposed to be big games, say a Cyberpunk or a Fallout 76, but then they flop for one reason. Now, even a game like that was successful, like I remember when Skyrim first came out, which was 10 years ago, by the way, when that happened, there was this giant collector's edition for the PS3 and the 360 that came with like a dragon statue and all this stuff. I don't remember what it retailed for. I want to say it was like $200. But I remember it getting to a point, like the thing was huge, and it took up so much space that Best Buys eventually just started, slashing it, trying to get rid of it. And I remember them finally getting rid of them for like $30 each. And I've noticed that like the bigger the set is, the more of a problem that becomes. Like, and as someone who does YouTube stuff, occasionally companies just send me random stuff. One of the more common things that actually gets sent to me, believe it or not, are like when they have a surplus of these giant collector's editions they don't know what to do with. So like Ubisoft once sent me like a Far Cry 5 collector's edition with a statue of the father. It was massive, but it was like, they didn't know what to do with it. So they literally emailed like everybody on their list and it was like, do you want one? We're just getting rid of them. Deep Silver did the same thing for, I think it was Saints Row 4 for the 360. Massive box. It even comes with like the dubstep gun, and it's like a plastic gun of that's in that game. They just sent it out because they were like, we can't get rid of these. And so I'm just curious, like, Have you noticed that, like, that these giant ones kind of stopped being a thing? I think maybe after Fallout 76, no one was willing to make one that big anymore.
I haven't seen like the massive ones. Like I think we hit peak collector's edition in like I would say like mid 2010s, around the time of like Fallout 76, around the time where like Call of Duty was shipping ones with a drone in it, or like
I remember that it was like it had like it had that like what was that thing called, like the hard case that was supposed to be like a military briefcase or whatever, and like a race car.
Yeah, they had one with night vision goggles. Like that is just the peak of self-indulgent like collector's edition thing. And it's been like I really think you hit the nail on the head with Fallout 76. I think that was the turning point where
I think that was the one that killed it. Yeah, at least the big ones.
You do still see them, especially through limited run games. But even then, they're little self-contained things. The biggest limited run game one that I've seen is maybe the size of like a console box, tops. Like, the size of like a Switch box. And it's not... I mean, the stuff that they put in there is cool, but it's not like a drone or like night vision goggles or a canvas bag, So I think companies are treading a bit more lightly. And I also think it helps that there's been a shift towards digital games in focus. So maybe these companies are printing less copies physically, so they don't have to worry about the overhead of these things. And also the rise in the price of games from $60 to $70 with the start of the 9th generation, could spell the end of these extravagant collector's editions.
It's kind of interesting. This is why you guys come to the podcast, I hope, is just we come into an unintended subject. This is not what I think either Rob or I thought we were going to talk about. And then we accidentally explore like the entire history of it.
Let me just... There's one point I wanted to mention. Sorry for cutting you off.
No, you're good.
You mentioned something I wanted to just shed a little light on. Actually, an interesting thing. When you mentioned that stores, usually, they'd have a problem with these big boxed collector's editions. They'd want to get rid of them for any price, just in terms because they're ruining their space. And I've seen that. I've seen that here, and it has personally happened to me in my own collection, where the problem of getting these, I ended up later on just taking them to a storage unit because they've taken too much space and there's even no room to put them in a shelf.
Exactly.
That's a really big problem. And overall, I wish that I hadn't, let's just say, obtained that in a way. Because I didn't get it technically. Someone got it for me. But
yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. Like, the ones I was talking about, like, I don't even have that Far Cry 5 one anymore. Like, we gave it away to a fan. And I still have the Saints Row 4 one, but it's like, it's a huge, annoying, ugly thing that I have. I have a Fallout 4 one for the PS4. It's also like, why did I get this? It's huge. It just takes up a bunch of space. I'm not even that big of a fan. So, like, that's where, personally, I've changed to, like, I have to really be a fan of the game in order to get one of those now, at least the big ones. But I think what we stumbled upon there was collector's editions, I think, have probably hit their sweet spot, or what they understand is their sweet spot, rather than make these giant ones that Best Buy will carry and they get burned with, like Fallout 76. I swear, I think that was the one that really killed it. Now you have more, let's call them controlled collector's editions, where it's like, okay, we're going to do them, but they're going to be a limited print run to maybe one store or online only, again, like a limited run games or anybody else online who does those. And then we'll just keep it just for the super fans. We can make enough money off of it because if we include a lot of this, extra stuff that frankly we make for very little, it justifies the costs and the world balances out. Collectors are happy. Everybody kind of ends up being happy with that, except for, people who just really want it and can't get it for financial reasons or whatever. But It's interesting. And I do want to circle back to Japan real quick because you brought that up. And he's totally right about that. What Rob said about how you go into a store and you'll see all these Japanese collector's editions. The term you used was they rot in a store. They rot in Japanese style, which means they're covered in plastic and they're pristine, flawless things. But he's absolutely right. Like, they will have these, what you would equate as a junk bin, like, or a clearance bin. You ever been to like a grocery store or something and they have like a clearance section where everything's just like, 90% off. They're trying to get rid of it. Now imagine that of just collector's editions of Japanese games that are flawless condition, and you just sit there as someone who's not from Japan, just dumbfounded, staring at it because you're like, I know people who want all these things. They're all super hard to find. Here they are in a bin that nobody cares about in this country, and the reason for that is cultural. As he pointed out, one half of that equation is that the Japanese typically have very small residences, and they want stuff to be. They just want smaller things. But the reason they get produced in the first place is actually the funny part, which is culturally Japan always needs to feel like it has the best stuff. So it's very much a have your cake and eat it too. Yes, we made the best thing. Now go buy it. Okay, I bought it, but it's too big. I don't want it. Let's get rid of it. That's the endless cycle of collector's editions in Japan.
I think I have just one thing to say, and
Sure.
I think maybe the verdict of what we've just said right now is that I believe that the best thing about collectors, or what you should do regarding collector's editions, is that if you actually like the thing, get it. And that's actually the philosophy that I've done. So I've only decided to get anything collector's editions that's related to Sonic. And when I did that, things became much better. I believe that that's something you can conclude from this conversation. Just get what you really like.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. Yeah.
I mean,
go ahead, Rob.
I just downsized a lot of my collection when I moved 2 months ago, and I kind of had a reckoning with a bunch of collector's editions in video games in general. Just like, okay, what am I going to keep? And the only collector's editions like I really kept were, to your point, just the ones from games that I really like. I have my Halo Reach one with the statue, because I absolutely love Halo Reach, so I'm going to keep that. But it's not on display in my game room. I've got it in my basement. And I've never bought a collector's edition from limited run games before. I just bought my first one, and it was for the Scott Pilgrim game, because I absolutely love that game, and I wanted to support Ubisoft and the creators and Limited Run for producing a physical copy of this game that was so mythical for so long. So, I figured that if I'm going to get a game that's only been digital for so long and has been lost for a number of years, it's like I'm going to get the biggest fucking collector's edition that I could.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Like, I'm kind of glad I didn't get sucked into too many collector's editions over time, because at least when I think about those big ones, I mean, right now, because of this particular conversation, I tend to now associate collector's editions with those massive boxes, but that's not really fair. There are plenty of like nicer sized ones. But at the end of the day, like these guys are saying, everybody, is if there's nothing wrong with getting collector's editions, just do yourself a favor and only target the ones where you're like, would I actually want a little keychain of that character for any reason? Like, would that interest me? Do I care enough about this franchise to actually want a keychain on my keys of X, Y, and Z character? Do I need a little lamp that has the logo of that game on it? Like, the random type of things you get with a collector's edition. Do you actually want those, or do you just like the idea of having it? Because if you just like the idea of having it more than actually, say, potentially being willing to use it, you'll end up in a position like us where you're like, I have these giant boxes of crap I don't know what to do with, and I got to put them in storage. That's not fun. Trust me, it sucks. All right, well, Abdullah, thank you very much for that subject, and we're going to move on to our last subject here, which is from Leafy Poo. You guys remember Leafy Poo?
No, I don't.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. In fact, I know you do, because literally this subject opens with Leafy Poo specifically wanted to tell me that, quote, Rob is a poop head. So there you go. Yeah. You guys, they have this like fake rivalry for some reason.
Fake?
I almost spit up my coffee. Anyway, so... yes. Now, Abdullah, have you been on for one of the Leafy Poo subjects before?
I think so.
So what?
As someone who was in the during the podcast, being
Mhm.
part of the podcast, you mean? Well,
Yeah.
that I don't really recall because I usually just focus on the question.
Sure. Okay. Well, so the reason I bring it up is this is relatively recent, but Leafy Poo has kind of decided that he wants to just always present Rob with two options for subjects, and let Rob decide what to go with. So last month he wanted you to either talk about the whole GameStop, stock thing that was going on, or the Pocket Station, like two totally random things. This time he got a little bit more, let's say, heady. So Rob, you're going to choose. Rob does not know what these subjects are. That's the whole point, is we have to surprise him. Yeah, that's the point. It's all right, man. These are like real subjects. So the first one is, where do you see the Switch going? Will Nintendo stick with the concept of a hybrid in the future? What happens? What do you think the Nintendo Switch's future is? Alternatively, what can we do to expand gaming to a female base? How do you eliminate the perception of it being more of a male-oriented hobby?
Oh, both those are really good subjects.
Exactly. That's why I said you don't have. This isn't like a trolling thing.
I'm really inclined to talk about the latter subject, but I feel that it's not right for us to discuss it because it's a total sausage fest, this podcast.
Yeah, I was. That's kind of. I mean,
Yeah.
It was up to you. It always was.
Yeah,
but
it's
that's
like,
exactly how I felt. Which is, it's weird for three men to tell women how to get
Yeah.
into games more. That's not right.
Because
we don't.
So I'm going to say let's go with the first one, but here's what I will say about the second. We don't have to have women get into games. Women are into games. They represent almost exactly one half of the video game audience worldwide. And
Absolutely true, but the question is more about how do you eliminate the perception that they're not there. But that's if we're not talking about it, then let's not talk about it.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
But it's a very interesting topic, by the way.
Yes,
Very
it is.
it absolutely is. But it's one of those where
maybe next month we'll do it, and I'll have my wife sit here, and
we'll bring some women on, and then when we say something dumb, they can tase us, and then
exactly.
whatever. All right. Anyway, so okay, then we will focus on the other. Again, so where do you see the Switch going? Will Nintendo stick with this concept of a hybrid platform? What do you think that future is? And again, this is specifically aimed at Rob. So Abdullah, just sit back and enjoy while we let Rob make a fool of himself, and then we can chime in.
So I'm
All right.
I'm not going to. I am not going to pull a Bernie Stoller and say the Nintendo Switch is not our future. No. No. The Switch just passed a really interesting milestone. It, I believe, right now in 2021 has crossed the 80 million units sold milestone. It is now the second highest sold Nintendo home console of all time, right behind the Nintendo Wii, which I think it sold 130 million.
I think it was just a little over 100.
I think it was more than that. Not quite like PlayStation levels, but still.
No, PS2 was like 155. It's not even close.
But still, and this, they've done it in 4 years. We just crossed the 4-year anniversary. Realistically, the Switch has another 3 years. Nintendo has said that it's basically at the halfway point of its lifespan. We've kind of moved past the standard 5-year console generation cycle. We went over that in the last podcast with Abdullah. And the Switch, it's printing money. It's right now. It's outpacing the PS4 in sales. It sold more than the PS5 and Xbox Series X over the holiday season. The thing is just doing insanely well. Granted, you're at an interesting point because the well of Wii U ports has effectively been tapped, aside from the Zelda games that are on there. What
is it? Xenocrisis? No, sorry. What am I talking?
Xenoblade, yeah. But I mean, for the most part, there's only a handful left. They can't keep going back to that well now. So it's really kind of a sink or swim from a game perspective for Nintendo. They need to start producing more dedicated first-party content for it. People have been saying like Super Switch 4K, Switch Pro for years now. Just recently there was the leak that Nintendo is planning on possibly releasing one this holiday season, like a 4K Switch with a bigger screen. I'll believe it when I see it, honestly. We've been talking about this, on and on for 2 years now, it feels like. But the Switch, in terms of its future, I think it's going to continue being what it is. Obviously, sales are going to taper off eventually, but I think it has a very good chance of becoming Nintendo's best home console, and maybe even their best-selling platform in general, beating out the DS, which I think is still their number one selling platform. So, will a Switch Pro help that? Of course it will. But I think even now, the Switch it's doing so well that in the future for their next generation system, what if you're going to call it the 9th or 10th gen system, whatever. But the next generation, it would be really hard for Nintendo to go back to the previous business model of having a dedicated portable or dedicated home system. The Switch has succeeded because it found a niche in the market that has been untapped since, I don't know, since the Sega Nomad. and people really, really wanted that. They wanted console quality games on the go. They wanted, a quality system that is able to kind of hang with its competitors, but still doesn't have to break the bank in terms of its price, and the Switch has been doing that. So I think if Nintendo were to backtrack, undo kind of what the Switch had done, that would be a huge mistake, and I don't think they're going to.
Abdullah?
Okay, so just let me get one point clear. The question, can you please just restate the question again so I make sure my answer is...
What do you think the future of the Nintendo Switch is, or Nintendo in general? Are they going to stick to the concept of using a hybrid platform like the Switch, or do you think they'll return to a dedicated, handheld and a dedicated home console? Just in general, what do you think Nintendo is going to do for the next 4 years?
All right. So the first thing is I wanted to mention that question is very interesting, and it was a question that I actually discussed with one of my friends in the past weeks. Some few weeks ago, and I think my answer would be generally similar to Rob's answer. Nintendo, they've done really well when it came to handhelds, as everybody knows. So what they did when they made the hybrid is that I believe they put their knowledge and power in that, and the way that Nintendo operates, and I believe we may have discussed that in a previous podcast, that Nintendo operates in terms of ideas more than in terms of power for its recent consoles, for example. So I think probably going back to their way in terms of purely dedicated for home consoles may not prove effective compared to what the Switch has done. And I believe Rob mentioned all the points and the numbers that the Switch has been doing well, and I think that's an indicator that they should continue on a similar model, or exactly on a similar model, than just switch back to what they did, because you've seen what happened with the Wii U, for example.
Yes. Okay, yeah, I agree with that. And I think we're all kind of on the same page, and I guess the way I would phrase it is, if you look at Nintendo's history, and this is not to fault them, this is logical to an extent, Nintendo does not really change anything until they fail. They just keep going with what works. So if you just to quickly reanalyze their history, they come out with the Famicom/NES. It's wildly successful. Basic concept is standalone home console, fun little machine, relatively easy to program for, whatever. They do it, and then they're like, okay, we only changed because we have to make a more powerful machine, the Super Nintendo, but they use the exact same basic model of what to do. And then even after the industry was changing around them, everybody's using CDs, whatever, they said, no, we're going to keep using that model. So they make the N64. And that's the first time they tasted any sort of failure. Now, I know people love the N64 and a lot of people had it, but in history's perspective, it's not one of the most successful consoles financially. It actually had a very low game count, and it also alienated a lot of developers from ever approaching them again, or at least taking a long time to do so. So that was when they finally changed up a bit, and then you got GameCube, which was like, okay, we're going to try to make something more competitive, and we're going to try, using discs, and we're going to try doing a bunch of new stuff. That, too, did not really pan out. Again, GameCube, great console, but same thing. They came in If you include the new one and the Dreamcast, then the GameCube came in third out of fifth place. And that's, not great. They lost to Xbox, who was just brand new and just trying it on a lark. So anyway, they're like, okay, we need to try something completely different. That's how you get the Wii. Now, the Wii was a completely different thing entirely, but it was GameCube hardware, but the point of it was nuts. And so then they're like, okay, giant success. So what do? They try to repeat that success. We take the Wii, we just use its name again, upgrade the hardware a bit. That time it doesn't work. Thus, it forces them to completely change. Even in their handheld lines, Game Boy is a big hit. What are we going to do? We'll hang on to it until we have to do something, which is add some color, but it's still Game Boy. In the middle there, they tried Virtual Boy. That didn't work out. You never heard from them again. But Game Boy Advance, big success. That's the one time I think really where that doesn't apply, because despite the success of the Game Boy Advance, they went on and said, forget the whole Game Boy line. We're doing this thing called DS. The DS line works out incredibly well. They go to the 3DS, works out very well. And that's basically the only reason they ended the DS line, was just to fuse it with the console line. I think they would have kept going. So because of that, the point I'm trying to make is the concept of a hybrid platform of Nintendo's home and portable things coming together, I cannot possibly imagine that they would in any way abandon that. I think they're going to absolutely stick with that. The question is basically how much more capable are they going to make the device? I can't sit here and pretend to be excited about things like, will they add backwards compatibility with the DS or Game Boy or any of that sort of stuff. I don't think they're going to do anything like that. You'll get Switch compatibility probably, but aside from that, I don't see them doing much else. And to your point, Rob, about what is their strategy in the short term, I think they can still ride out 2021 easily by taking what's left of the Wii U pantry, maybe even 2022, because as I look over at the collection there are still a few where they could do something like Star Fox Guard. If they make some various changes in that game, they could probably bring out the Star Fox game that people wanted that they never really played in the first place. And I know that they're about to shut down the servers for the original Super Mario Maker. You give that enough time, it's possible to re-release Super Mario Maker Deluxe or whatever. But I mean, yeah, aside from that, you're pretty much on point. There's not much else that Nintendo made that they can really take out of the Wii U. I'm a little surprised that companies like Sega haven't taken all of their games off there, like those Sonic games. But yeah, I think we're all kind of on the same page here about that future.
Yeah. The future is bright. I think bottom line, people are kind of expecting like Nintendo has to do something to keep pace with the Xbox Series X and the PS5. They don't need to. Would a 4K Switch be nice? Yeah, of course it would. I just got a new 4K TV. I'm sure it would look wonderful. The new Breath of the Wild or something like that, or Metroid Prime 4 in 4K. Yeah, that'd be great. And honestly, I'd probably buy one if it came out, but I don't think it's needed. Nintendo has really kind of carved its separate path the past 5 years, and the past 15 years at this point. And for the most part, Wii U aside, it's really served them well, and I think it will continue to serve them well.
One thing that the Wii U did that the others didn't, and that's actually part of why its legacy is so tarnished by Nintendo, is Nintendo has a history of demanding that they make profit on the hardware, which is not common in video game consoles. They typically, like Sony kind of more or less reinvented this idea of give away the razor to sell the blades, which means they sold you the PS1 much less money than it costs for them to build it. And the reason they can do that is they bank on the idea that if you buy it, you'll also buy games, and that's where they'll make their money. Nintendo never does that. The one time they did was the Wii U. The Wii U costs a lot more to make than they were selling it for, but they were so sure it would work because of how successful the Wii was that they're like, it doesn't even matter. It's a loss leader. Let's do it. But that model is extremely dangerous when it doesn't pan out. Just ask Sony with the PlayStation 3. It gets dangerous. So with that said, the reason I bring that up is whatever Nintendo's going to do next, they're going to want to make money on the hardware. You can't make expensive portables. You can't do that. So they would have to basically sell at most, depending on what the technology is caught up to. I think honestly, the best you could hope for is the equivalency of like a PS4 Pro in your pocket. I think that's about the best you can realistically get and that depends on when they do this. If that happens in the next like 4 years, sure. If it happens in the next like year, probably not even that high. Maybe then you get like an Xbox One base model in your pocket. You know what I'm saying? So honestly, the longer you wait, or at least the longer they wait, the better the hardware is going to get. I think that's pretty common sense, but there's zero chance in my mind that Nintendo's like, hey guys, forget the hybrid concept. Our next console is going to be like 8K compatible. You know, like it's going to be this ridiculous, overpowered thing. Like it's never going to happen. Nintendo is not going to try to make competitive hardware anymore on a technological level, because as you just very eloquently said, they don't need to do that and be successful. That's largely how Nintendo has operated for a long period of its career. And now that they have really hit that stride of being able to perfectly balance that, there's no reason for them to deal with it. In fact, one of the benefits they have is, yeah, our hardware is underpowered, but it's also like one of the highest selling things ever. So sorry, third-party developers who are complaining about how you can't get games to run on it. You better figure it out. Hence, you get things like Witcher 3. Like Witcher 3 came out when it should have been like technically impossible to do that, because they were just like, we need to get our game on this platform because it will sell really well. So they cut every corner they can, but still make the game competent, and it exists. Like you will get those games. They just won't be obviously they won't be the definitive versions, but you know, at least if you upgrade the hardware, you open up access to more stuff, but it's always going to be a generation behind, at least.
Yeah. And I think Nintendo's pivot towards a focus on independent games has really been really an unsung factor in the Switch's success. It kind of started on the Wii U with them being less overtly hostile to independent game developers porting games to their system. Looking at my Switch collection, I don't think I have a single, like, one of those AAA third-party ports on the Switch. Like, aside from the Nintendo stuff, it's probably 50-50 between Nintendo-made, you know, first-party projects and independent games through Limited Run, through, you know, I'm 8-Bit and all of these companies, physical releases. It's really just an indie powerhouse. And it's shown that if a company releases, an independent company releases a game, either digitally or physically, on the PS4 and the Switch version outsells the PS4 just because of that market exposure.
Yeah, I think another factor to that is, again, you're talking capabilities. Like the reason you may not buy a Witcher 3 is because you own an Xbox or you own a PS4 or you own a PC, whatever. So you don't have a reason to get an inferior version, but the option exists for people who, like, this is the only platform they care about having. And of course, there's the portability factor, I grant you that. But with the indies that you're talking about, it really makes no difference if it comes off of a PS4 or a PS5 or a Switch, because it's usually like some 2D game anyway. So it's probably going to run about the same. I'm not going to say that's going to be universally the case, but at least then, if it's a game that's basically the same on both platforms with the Switch, you then have the option of portability and television. Is that about it? Is that about your reasoning?
No, absolutely.
There you go. Abdullah, any other thoughts on any of this?
Well, I think you guys have talked about it in all possible aspects, and overall, it's we're on the same page here. Definitely agree to what you guys say about Nintendo and their philosophy in the video game industry.
All right. Well, then, thank you very much, Leafy Poo, for that particular subject. And with that, we wrap up the podcast today. So I want to give a huge shout out to, again, Leafy Poo, to Trey Wagner, Joseph Tamburino, Luis Bonilla, Michael Kelly, Julian Espinoza, Connor Wright, Sea-Dog, and of course you, Abdullah. Also to our man Keith, I hope you get well soon. But yeah, Abdullah, thank you, Abdullah, for joining us as always. Looking forward.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, dude, and like again, thank you for coming up with a subject that like really bent our minds. It's like we really needed to talk about. Like, yeah. I didn't realize like how much I needed to talk about that until we started talking about that.
Until you saw the timestamp.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. And I guess thanks to Rob for still being here.
Thank you. I guess.
Yeah. Whatever.
You're welcome. I guess.
Yeah. Whatever.
All
right. Whatever. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Please like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. can they find either of you guys on social media? Do you want to give yourself little plugs here?
Abdullah, are you on Instagram or Facebook?
I am. Yeah, I recently started my gaming platform.
Well, shout it out, man. Tell everybody.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. I'm still slow, but I'll hopefully get there soon. My room is almost done. So I'm on, mainly I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Blue Sky Zone UAE. That's Blue Sky Zone _UAE. If you want, I could just...
give me a link. I'll put it in the description.
Oh, all right. Thank you so much. I'm there mostly on Twitter or Instagram. Still startup, but hope with more people to view it, hopefully get better.
And you could find me every week at Digital Press Video Games in Clifton, New Jersey, the best video game store on the East Coast, and on Instagram at Grappadora_gaming.
So you have two options for Rob. You can either follow him on Instagram, or you can literally go stalk him at where he works.
Exactly.
That's what he just invited
that
you
happened
to do.
at that live stream that we did.
It did happen on a live
that?
stream once. Like, we were literally talking, and someone watching the live stream walked into the store and saw Rob on the live stream talking. It was some Matrix shit.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you guys. All my stuff's in the description as always. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks again, everybody, and thank you especially to all the Patreon backers. You guys are the best. Thank you very much, and see you all later.
Peace.
All right, take care.